Welcome to today's Explainer. If you're a focused learner looking to unpack some truly complex historical and spiritual texts, you are absolutely in the right place. Today, we're immersing ourselves in the vivid and honestly often challenging imagery of Isaiah 57. As we go through this, I want you to picture this explainer almost through the lens of a cinematic, historically accurate oil painting. We're going to explore a narrative that's bathed in the really dark, heavy shadows of ancient Judah's spiritual crisis. But as you'll see, it ultimately breaks through into the profound, bright light of God's promised restoration. Okay, let's jump right in. Here's a quick roadmap of our agenda today. Number 1, the reign of King Manasseh. 2, the righteous enter into peace. 3, idolatry and spiritual adultery. 4, enlarged bed versus tent. 5, the futility of foreign alliances. And 6, healing for the humble. Section 1, the reign of King Manasseh, a period of deep spiritual crisis. To really understand the heavy, poetic imagery Isaiah uses here, we first have to look at the grim political and spiritual reality of Judah's leadership at this specific time. You see, King Hezekiah had instituted some very righteous religious reforms, but his son, King Manasseh, he violently reversed them. During his reign, from 697 to 642 BC, Manasseh led Judah into deep, deep apostasy. He didn't just tolerate idol worship, he actively promoted it. He erected pagan altars to Baal and Asherah and engaged in literally the darkest of occult practices. He even persecuted the faithful prophets. And this complete abandonment of their covenant, well, it set the nation on a disastrous path that would eventually culminate in the Babylonian exile in 586 BC. Section 2. The righteous enter into peace. Deliverance from the evil to come. Isaiah chapter 57 verses 1 and 2 states, "The righteous perisheth, and no man layeth it to heart. He shall enter into peace. They shall rest in their beds, each one walking in his uprightness." Right in the midst of this chaotic, oppressive era under Manasseh, a very immediate problem came up for the faithful. Basically, how do we make sense of the deaths of godly people? The text opens with that puzzling reality that the righteous perish and no one really seems to care. But it immediately offers a profound comfort. The crucial takeaway here is that God sometimes removes the righteous to actually spare them from witnessing impending destruction. A prime historical example of this is King Josiah, who God allowed to die in peace before the Babylonians completely laid waste to Jerusalem. So for the faithful, death in this context wasn't some tragedy of abandonment. It was actually a merciful deliverance into peace. Section 3. Idolatry and spiritual adultery, forsaking the covenant. Now we enter the real agitation phase of our narrative. We're exposing the extreme depths of corruption Judah sank into when they actively abandoned the true God. Isaiah chapter 57 verse 5 states, "Inflaming yourselves with idols under every green tree, slaying the children in the valleys under the cliffs of the rocks." The prophet pulls absolutely no punches describing this decay. This wasn't just about bowing down to statues. This is about horrific moral decay. The people chose false gods and actually engaged in the extreme, unthinkable cruelty of child sacrifice. To put this into perspective, we need to talk about the Valley of Hinnom, also known as Gehenna. This was a real physical valley just outside Jerusalem. It became the notorious site for Moloch worship, which is exactly where these unspeakable cruelties took place. In fact, this location became so deeply associated with horror and fire that Gehenna eventually became the biblical metaphor for hell itself. Grounding this in a real geographical location really helps us grasp the severe, undeniable reality of the mortal corruption that was happening literally right on the doorstep of God's holy city. And they flaunted this rebellion openly. Isaiah chapter 57 verse 7 states, "Upon a lofty and high mountain hast thou set thy bed, even thither wentst thou up to offer sacrifice." You have to remember, God had given a very clear command in Deuteronomy that worship was to happen only at the temple in Jerusalem. By setting up these high mountain shrines, Judah was in direct, public defiance of the Mosaic covenant. They were engaging in what the prophet brilliantly likens to unfaithfulness in a marriage. Section 4. Enlarged bed versus tent. The metaphor of unholy alliances. Let's look closely at how Isaiah uses this metaphor of an enlarged bed to describe not just religious idolatry, but spiritual adultery committed through political treaties. Notice the really profound contrast here. The enlarged bed from Isaiah 57 symbolizes Judah forsaking God to essentially gather lovers. They were making alliances with foreign powers and welcoming their pagan gods straight into the nation. It's a picture of compromise and false security. Now contrast this with the enlarged tent from Isaiah 54, where God calls his people to lengthen their cords and strengthen their stakes. That tent represents preparing for an expansion in divine blessing, rooted entirely in faith and obedience. Sadly, Judah actively chose the bed of compromise over the tent of faith. And the counterfeit nature of their actions goes even deeper than that. Isaiah notes they set up idolatrous symbols behind the doors and posts, which signifies a hidden, private corruption. Compare this directly to God's command in Deuteronomy to write his words publicly upon the posts of their houses and gates. So instead of the public, visible loyalty of the covenant, they replaced it with secret shame and disloyalty. Section 5. Futility of foreign alliances. Trusting nations instead of God. Let's dig into the specific geopolitical history to see exactly who Judah was climbing into bed with and all the baggage they brought back with them. Judah was essentially seeking protection from everyone except God. They went to Egypt for military support, and, well, that brought back Egyptian idolatry and calf worship. King Ahaz sought protection from Assyria, and he ended up modifying the Jerusalem temple with Assyrian altar designs. King Hezekiah welcomed Babylonian envoys, which introduced Babylonian astrology and influence. And then, through royal marriages with Phoenicia, they imported shrines to Baal and Ashtoreth. The tragic irony of all this is that these alliances, which were supposedly meant to save them, ended up importing the exact corruption that guaranteed their judgment. Isaiah chapter 57, verses 9 and 10 states, "And thou wentest to the king with ointment, and didst increase thy perfumes. Thou art wearied in the greatness of thy way, yet saidst thou not, there is no hope." Isaiah is completely exposing the sheer exhaustion of this strategy. The ointments and perfumes here, they represent the costly gifts and bribes Judah paid to secure these foreign alliances. They totally exhausted themselves chasing this false security, taking life into their own hands, and yet they stubbornly refused to admit that their way just wasn't working. Isaiah chapter 57, verses 12 and 13 states, "I will declare thy righteousness and thy works, for they shall not profit thee. When thou criest, let thy companies deliver thee, but the wind shall carry them all away." God issues a direct challenge to these hollow strategies. He's essentially saying, okay, let your idols and your foreign companies save you if they can. But it's total vanity. Trusting in the mechanical keeping of the law or in these false idols yields absolutely nothing. When true deliverance is actually needed, the wind is simply going to carry all those false hopes away. Which brings us to a really profound question drawn directly from verse 11 of our text. I want you to just reflect on this for a second. Of whom have you been afraid? That you have lied and not remembered God. Judah feared the surrounding empires way more than they revered their creator. It's a deeply challenging question about where we truly place our trust when we feel threatened. Section 6. Healing for the humble. The promise of restoration. Now, we finally arrive at the solution phase. Visualize a shift in our aesthetic here. We're moving from those dark, oppressive shadows of the Hinnom Valley straight into a bright, natural landscape as we turn to God's incredible restorative mercy. Isaiah chapter 57, verse 15 states, "For thus saith the high and lofty one that inhabiteth eternity, I dwell in the high and holy place, with him also that is of a contrite and humble spirit." The high and lofty Creator, who literally inhabits eternity, actively chooses to stoop down and dwell with those who are humble and repentant. It's just a breathtaking contrast to the lofty pagan mountain shrines we saw earlier. God's true dwelling place is with a contrite heart. Isaiah chapter 57, verse 18 states, "I have seen his ways and will heal him. I will lead him also and restore comforts unto him and to his mourners." He promises an ultimate pivot here. God saw their covetousness, and yes, he was righteously angry, but he promises he will not contend forever. Instead of final destruction for the repentant remnant, he offers deep spiritual healing, guidance, and true restoration. Isaiah chapter 57, verses 20 and 21 states, "But the wicked are like the troubled sea when it cannot rest. There is no peace, saith my God, to the wicked." So a stark contrast remains for those who refuse this peace. While the humble find restoration, those who continually reject God and insist on trusting in their own devices will experience a restless, turbulent reality. They're churning up mire and dirt like a stormy sea, completely and totally devoid of peace. Which brings us to our conclusion. After exploring the really dark history of Manasseh, the tragedy of these unholy alliances, and the brilliant contrast between the enlarged bed and the enlarged tent, I want to leave you with this thought. Are you relying on an enlarged bed of false security, exhausting yourself with worldly alliances, or are you resting humbly in the peace of the true covenant? I really hope this explainer has sparked your curiosity to dive even deeper into the text on your own. Thank you so much for learning with me today.